Part 1. The molecule that shouldn't exist. Imagine you're driving through the Rocky Mountains of Colorado late at night. The highway is almost empty. Pine trees stretch into darkness on both sides, and the only sound is the steady hum of your tires against the asphalt. The sky above is packed with stars, brighter than you've ever seen before. Now imagine someone tells you that hidden inside nearly every living organism on Earth is a tiny molecule capable of completely replacing this reality with another one. Not making you dream, not making you imagine things, but convincing you, completely, that you've entered another place. A place where impossible geometry exists, where time behaves differently, where intelligent beings seem to know you before you've ever met them. It sounds like science fiction. Yet for decades, neuroscientists, chemists, psychologists, and thousands of ordinary people have reported experiences that are disturbingly similar. The molecule responsible is called DMT. Some researchers describe it as the strangest psychedelic ever discovered. Others believe it's simply a powerful hallucination. But a growing number of scientists are asking a question that would have been laughed out of universities only 20 years ago. What if it isn't just a hallucination? What if consciousness itself is far stranger than we've ever imagined? Tonight, we're going to follow one researcher's 30-year journey through chemistry, neuroscience, mathematics, and consciousness. A journey that began in the quiet mountains of Colorado and eventually challenged one of science's oldest assumptions, that the brain creates reality. Because maybe, reality isn't created. Maybe it's received. The story begins with a boy who spent more time reading about ghosts than baseball. While most kids collected comic books, he collected stories about haunted houses, disappearances, strange lights in the woods, and mysterious creatures reported deep inside national parks. His parents assumed it was just a phase. Teachers thought he had an overactive imagination. But his curiosity never disappeared. As he grew older, ghost stories became psychology. Psychology became biology. Biology became chemistry. Eventually, one question consumed almost every hour of his life. What actually creates conscious experience? Not thoughts, not memories. Experience itself. How does the brain produce an entire universe inside your head every second you're alive? Most scientists approach the problem from one direction. Study neurons, study electricity, study neurotransmitters. Eventually, consciousness will explain itself. But something always felt missing. Then, during graduate school, he stumbled across an old scientific paper describing an obscure compound first synthesized nearly a century earlier. Dimethyltryptamine, DMT. The paper barely described its effects, only a few paragraphs, but one sentence changed everything. Subjects consistently reported entering a completely different world, not distorted, different. That single word fascinated him. Different. Because ordinary hallucinations don't replace reality. They modify it. Someone with a fever may see insects crawling on the wall. A person suffering from schizophrenia may hear voices. People dreaming still construct familiar environments, houses, people, cities, forests. Everything comes from memory. Everything is built using pieces the brain already understands. But DMT reports were different. People weren't describing altered versions of Earth. They described environments no human should know how to imagine. Cities made from living light, objects with impossible geometry, machines that seemed alive, rooms existing in more than 3 dimensions, entire civilizations populated by beings unlike anything found in nature. Even stranger. Thousands of people who had never met each other described remarkably similar experiences, similar architecture, similar entities, similar emotions, similar conversations. That shouldn't happen. Not at this scale, not repeatedly, and certainly not across different cultures. So he asked the obvious question. If every brain is inventing these worlds independently, why do they look so similar? At first, he assumed coincidence, then expectation. Maybe people were reading the same books before taking DMT. Maybe stories spread online. Maybe culture shaped the experience. But when he started comparing reports written decades apart, long before the internet existed, something unusual appeared. Patterns. Again, and again, and again. Not identical stories, but unmistakably familiar themes, almost as if thousands of travelers were visiting different neighborhoods inside the same impossible city. That idea sounded ridiculous, which is exactly why he couldn't ignore it. Because science isn't supposed to reject strange ideas simply because they sound strange. Science is. Part 2. The question science didn't want to ask. Most scientists stopped at one conclusion. DMT causes hallucinations. Case closed. But the more research he read, the less satisfied he became with that explanation. Hallucinations usually borrow from memory. Your brain rearranges pieces of experiences you've already had. Faces become distorted. Objects melt. Colors intensify. Sounds become strange. But the foundation remains familiar. DMT seemed to ignore that rule entirely. People repeatedly described entering places with impossible architecture, vast cities built from moving geometry, landscapes that appeared to fold into themselves, structures that couldn't exist in ordinary three-dimensional space. Even more unsettling were the encounters. Again and again, participants reported meeting intelligent beings, not vague shadows, not random figures. They behaved as if they possessed their own personalities. Some welcomed visitors, others ignored them completely. Some appeared amused, a few seemed annoyed, and a surprising number acted as if they had been expecting the visitor all along. Imagine walking into a room you've never seen before, only for everyone inside to turn toward you and say, "You're finally here." That theme appeared so often that researchers couldn't simply dismiss it as coincidence. The details varied, descriptions didn't. Some witnesses spoke of tiny, playful figures moving faster than seemed possible. Others described towering, luminous beings made entirely of light. Some encountered insect-like intelligences. Others saw mechanical-looking entities constructing objects that made no sense. Yet nearly everyone agreed on one thing. Whatever they met, it felt alive, not symbolic, not imaginary. Alive. Of course, that doesn't prove anything. Our brains are remarkably good at creating convincing experiences. Dreams can feel real. Virtual reality can fool the senses. Certain neurological disorders can produce astonishingly vivid perceptions. So perhaps DMT was simply the most powerful illusion ever discovered. That remained the safest explanation. But then another mystery appeared. Researchers noticed that many experienced users reported something they called the waiting room. Instead of immediately entering the deepest part of the experience, they arrived somewhere in between. Almost like standing inside the lobby of an unfamiliar building. The walls shimmered with impossible patterns. Everything seemed alive. And there was often a strange feeling that someone, or something, was watching. Not threatening, simply observing. Some people stayed there only seconds. Others never went any deeper. It was as if access had been denied. The strangest part? People who had never spoken to one another described almost identical transitional environments. Again, no proof, but enough to raise eyebrows. Then came something even harder to explain. Long-term users began reporting what became known informally as the lockout. Imagine using the exact same substance dozens of times, same dose, same method, same environment. Everything works normally, until one day, nothing. Instead of entering the familiar experience, They encountered a clear message. Sometimes it wasn't spoken aloud. Sometimes it appeared as a feeling, sometimes as a gesture. The meaning, however, was unmistakable. Not today. Or, you've seen enough. Or simply, no. Some described an unseen presence closing a door. Others reported a figure silently shaking its head. Several claimed they were told they were no longer welcome. Then, the experience ended. Not gradually, instantly. From a pharmacological perspective, that made very little sense. The molecule was still active. Its concentration hadn't suddenly disappeared. Yet the experience had. Even stranger. Some users remained locked out for months. Others claimed it lasted years. Scientists had no accepted explanation. Maybe psychology played a role. Maybe expectation influenced perception. Maybe unknown brain mechanisms were involved. All reasonable possibilities. But none completely explained why the reports were so remarkably similar. That question refused to disappear. If consciousness was simply generating random hallucinations, why did the randomness keep following recognizable patterns? And if something more was happening, how could anyone possibly test it? Science doesn't advance through belief. It advances through experiments. The challenge wasn't convincing people. The challenge was designing an experiment capable of separating imagination from something genuinely unknown. That problem would eventually lead researchers toward an idea few neuroscientists had seriously considered before. Maybe the brain isn't creating reality. Maybe it's filtering it.